Hey everybody, Jeff Rolfing with Everything Boston Whaler. I've been working with Boston Whaler bringing you guys information and details about the new 210 Vantage, which is the most recent hull that Whaler has released. Um, Released this spring in the Miami Boat Show 2024. This is the latest model that exists. But I wanted to spend some time and talk about in this segment a little bit about the history of Whaler, um, and also what Whaler means to me. And I think it resonates kind of true with the entire global community of owners as a whole. Um, I know a lot of people think that the company started in 1958. In fact, it actually started before that. Dick Fisher first started selling hulls to the public in 1958 at the New York Boat Show. But prior to that, it was Ray Hunt and Dick Fisher who started prototyping what would become a Boston whaler. Early in the development, they were doing all kinds of rowing dinghies and things like that, but it was really Ray Hunt who kind of talked Dick Fisher into developing an outboard powered skiff. At that time, they started working with Hickman, who had the Hickman Sea Sled, because it was a really unique and stable boat. Ray Hunt saw a lot of promise with it, but it didn't actually necessarily perform like they had hoped. With the tunnel hull, it didn't really do well with an outboard, and also Dick Fisher and Ray Hunt didn't see eye to eye with Hickman. So even though they started to become influenced by the Sea Sled, they decided to part ways with Hickman and develop what would become Cathedral Hull. So Hunt worked to develop that center keel to the outer sponsons. So you got the stability of the outer sponsons, but you had some, wave breaking ability with that center keel. Of course, it's developed a lot since those early years, but really it was about 1956 to 1957 when what formed the original 13 whaler was developed. Prior to 1958, there were multiple prototype hulls that were built. Um, the what we know as the 13 whaler, the original 13 whaler, there was a number of prototype hulls that were built, and those were stenciled with an FP number. FP stood for Fisher Pierce. So Dick Fisher owned a company with Bob Pierce. Fisher Pierce, Boston Whaler was underneath that kind of corporate umbrella. Eventually, Dick Fisher bought Bob Pierce out, but Fisher Pierce was the original parent company to Boston Whaler. So there are three hulls that exist that are known to exist before 1958. There's FP38, which is owned by a gentleman in New England. I don't think he wants to be identified, so I won't say who it is. But that is the oldest known Boston whaler to exist anywhere. Um, there are other FP hulls that are known to exist. FP55 is owned by a gentleman, Stephen Bogue, who lives in Massachusetts, and then FP56 is actually in possession at the factory. So those are the only three pre-1958 hulls that are known to exist. So what was released in 1958 at the New York Boat Show, everybody knew as kind of the quintessential Boston whaler. The boats weren't originally super well received. A lot of people called them plastic bathtubs and kind of made fun of them. But Dick Fisher was an ultimate salesperson and a marketing person, and he really wanted to get that boat out there and seen. Actually, the name Boston Whaler is kind of it's a joke. It's tongue in cheek. Dick Fisher named it Boston Whaler because there was never a whaling fleet in Boston itself. So he wanted people to question, like, what is a Boston whaler and investigate it further. And he also took to doing stunts, which everybody has seen with him cutting the boat in half and running it. Um, Carl Kiefer of Mercury Marine was so impressed of the boat, being cut in half that he invited Dick Fisher to a Mercury dealer meeting to cut a boat in half and be run with a Mercury outboard. And of course, everybody knows the famous Life magazine cover with Dick Fisher with the saw sticking straight up out of the boat. That definitely got Boston Whaler notoriety. So it was Dick Fisher and Ray Hunt who continued to develop larger hulls. In 1961, they released the Sakana in Eastport. Um, that, I believe, in my personal opinion, to be the world's first center console. There are some people who want to argue that the Aquasport was actually the world's first center console, but the Aquasport was released after 1961 when the Eastport and Nauset were released. The Nauset Eastport existed, and then the Sakana came in a few years later. The Sakana was same hull, same wood center console. There were some variations between them. The Nauset and Eastport, you could get a 40-inch wide center console, which was, a little bit bigger than what you had on the Sakana. Sakana had a forward casting platform, console, and RPS, where the Eastport and Nauset had a fixed back pilot seat, and the Eastport had a full stern seat. So after that haul, it was really when Bob Doherty came in starting to work with Boston Whaler. At that time, it was Dick Fisher and Bob Doherty who continued to develop boats. Ray Hunt was kind of there, but not necessarily as prominent of a designer. Dick Fisher and Ray Hunt continued to develop models, originally based on the non-Smirk 16 hulls through the 60s, and then as we got into the early 1970s is when the original Outrage was released. Um, that hull has been around for almost 50 years now. There's actually hull number one is still in use today. It's used up at the Woods Hole Institute up in Massachusetts. That original hull was donated to the Marine Biological Institute there by Dick Fisher. And they still use that boat every single day to get out and take samples. So, 50 years on, that original hull is still being used, and that nameplate is well known throughout the world today as kind of one of the top line center consoles that you can have. After that, it was about 1971 to 1972 when Dick Fisher retired. Um, at that point in time, the funny story is the original Outrage is known as a rib side because it has the ribbed hulled sides. I believe, and a little bit of discussion with Bob Doherty, the reason for those rib sides were Dick Fisher wanted extra rigidity, and he was worried about that top cap, which is really just the fiberglass skin, needing extra rigidity in the vertical cross section, and that's why those ribs are there. Bob Doherty argued that you didn't need it, that the fiberglass was strong enough to support itself, and that it was going to be a really difficult part to pull out of the mold. And truth be told, it was very difficult. The shop people had a tough time getting those out of the molds, and the day that Dick Fisher retired, Bob Doherty ordered that top cap mold to be cut up. That's why there's so few rib sides out there. After that, smooth side came into being, and that's what everybody knows as a smooth side. So all the ribs are gone, has smooth hull sides, and that was what Bob Doherty originally wanted that boat to be. Of course, after that, the 19 came out, and you had the Revenge line that came out, and all of the classics started to come out in full effect under Bob Doherty. And in 1969, actually, Dick Fisher sold Boston Whaler to the CML Group. This is going back a little bit in kind of the timeline, but in 1968, Dick Fisher had to sell Boston Whaler so that the company didn't go bankrupt, and then also Fisher Pierce and Sigma Instruments that he also owned didn't go bankrupt. Dick Fisher had invested heavily in the Homelight outboard series, which was actually the world's first four-stroke outboards. But the marketplace really wasn't ready for it, and he invested a lot in tooling and trying to get production up and running, and it just really never took off. He was trying to vertically integrate the company much like it is today, where you build a boat and you provide an outboard, and it's kind of a package. Unfortunately, it was a little bit ahead of its time, and like I said, it just didn't take off. So Dick Fisher had to sell the company in 1969 to the CML Group and then stayed on through his retirement. The CML years are some of the most prolific under Bob Doherty. That's when a lot of the classic hulls that everybody really knows, the 18 Outrage, the 22, the 20, the 25, the 27s, all of the classic 17s and 15s, the introduced the 11 as well and updated the 13. The 9 came out. So a lot of those classic boats were all designed by Bob Doherty. And in 1976, the 17 came into being, um, and as well as the 15. So prior to 1976, you had the non-smirked 16 hulls, which were a true cathedral hull. In 1976 is when Boston Whaler released the 15 and updated the 16.7 overall length hull, which became the 17. The reason why Whaler changed that name from a 16 to a 17 is two reasons. With the introduction of the 15 being released, which was the smirked hull, it's always been a smirked hull, And then having another boat in the model lineup that was so close, named a 16, Whaler wanted more separation between the two, so buyers felt like there was a larger jump between the two, even though that the non-smirk 16 and smirk 17 are both 16 feet 7 inches overall length. That denoted kind of the hull design change, the smirked bow, and also the separation, greater separation in the model lineup between the 15 and the 17. So Doherty stayed on for a number of years, developed a lot of what people know as the classic models. Whaler existed through that time. CML Group owned Whaler up until about 1991, and then CML Group sold to Reebok. Under that time is when Whaler and Doherty parted ways. Van Lanker took over the overall design for Whaler at that point in time. There have been subsequent leads of design. Currently, it's Jean Barbier. Um, but at that time, um, Doherty left and Whaler continued on under Reebok for a few years. I believe it was around 1993 when Reebok, yeah, it was the shoe company actually owned Whaler, sold to the Meridian Group. The Meridian Group owned Whaler from about 93 to 96. In 1996 is when Brunswick bought Boston Whaler. I believe it was May 31st, 1996. I know a lot of people feel like, oh, when Brunswick bought Whaler, they were no longer the original Boston Whaler. Well, the original Boston Whaler was always under a parent umbrella, and actually, Boston Whaler was first sold in 1969, like I said. So it was never a standalone company. It was always a corporation underneath some sort of umbrella. I think a lot of people saw Brunswick's purchase of Whaler is kind of a bad thing because, they didn't want to be commingled with Bayliner as well as Sea Ray. Everybody felt Boston Whaler was a lot different and unique, and for it to fall underneath a corporate umbrella may have kind of tainted its ownership. I'll be honest with you, if Brunswick didn't buy Boston Whaler in 1996, the brand wouldn't exist today. And to me, it's that investment that Brunswick made in that time frame that really saved the brand. What Brunswick needed was a boat to kind of round out their offerings, and specifically in the saltwater market. And that's really what Boston Whaler was, a saltwater boat. Um, and Brunswick invested heavily into Whaler at that point in time to kind of get it up to speed, updated a lot of manufacturing and a lot of engineering processes, and actually, through those years, has really streamlined it into the efficient model that it is today. Um, and it was because of that investment that Whaler continued to grow and thrive and become the brand that it is today. It's always been a pinnacle brand, and I believe it still is today. And I believe myself that it's because of Brunswick's investment. Now, I think a lot of people also say, oh, well, if Dick Fisher was alive today, he'd roll over in his grave seeing what Boston Whaler has become. They're not selling small boats anymore. I think that's kind of a fallacy. Whaler does still sell a lot of small boats, but they also make a lot of big boats. And the reason why they need to make these big boats is because that's where the marketplace is. And I truly believe if Dick Fisher was alive today, he would understand what the marketplace is. Dick Fisher was an excellent salesperson but an excellent businessman, and he understood what the market needed, especially after his fault with Homelight and having to sell the Whaler Corporation to CML. I think at that point in time, he realized you need to understand the market and you need to do what the market wants. And today's market is really about building bigger center consoles. That's where the marketplace is going. There's better margins there. And it just overall, you need to be in that marketplace to continue to have revenue as well as investment to be able to make into smaller boats. And Whaler, like I said, still makes smaller boats today. I think a lot of people have this idea that they've lost touch with the classics, and I don't necessarily believe that. I believe as a global community of Whaler owners, both new owners as well as classic owners, really need each other and benefit from each other. The reason why Whalers have such great resale in the classic market today is because they are a pinnacle boat. They were a pinnacle boat of that time, and there's a lot of history to it. And the reason why Whalers still exist today and they have such great cachet and brand equity is because there are still tons of classics out there that are being used. And that's a great story about build quality, about history and longevity of the product. So I think that's beneficial, excuse me, to both parties. But I think for me, the one unique thing about all of Boston Whaler is the fact that still today the classics exist. And for me, I like to say Boston Whaler is one of the few companies out there, few brands out there, especially in the marine industry. I can't think of another brand to where it could be your first boat and your last boat. The fact that there are still tons of classics out there that exist um, means that kids today can get into a small boat and they can get involved with the brand and build that brand equity and that love for the brand on an older boat that they can afford or fix up. Or like myself, I've got a 15 sitting here. My first whaler was a 15. My formidable years growing up on the water were on a Boston whaler. That means so much to me. Um, and I also want to share that with my kids, and that's why I have this boat. And I've had numerous other classics. I want my kids to have what I had as a kid. And I think a lot of owners have that same sort of connection with the product and the brand. But also, I like to say it's also something that you can grow with. A boat like this, the 210 Vantage, is something that a family can have. Or, for me, first boat, last boat, you know, I've built a great professional career, and my goal is to, when I retire, buy a much bigger whaler, and that is kind of my sunset years. That's been a pinnacle achievement that I want to make for myself, and I think a lot of other people are want to make that same sort of achievement or have already done that. I know there are a lot of owners out there who have large whalers from, 33 Outrage, 38 Outrage, 42 Outrages, 405 Conquest that have smaller whalers and even classics as well because again, they want that connection to what they had growing up and then also what fits their lifestyle today. And like I said, I can't think of another brand in the marine industry that can offer that. And that's truly what Whaler means to me. Um, a little bit of the history. So hopefully you guys learned something about the history of the Whaler. And hopefully, you guys feel the same I do about the brand and you guys kind of have that connection. Um, I appreciate everybody taking the time to sit through this and listen. If you kind of feel the same way, feel free to make comments, feel free to reach out. And, you know, go out and enjoy your whaler. That's what it's meant to be. I know a lot of people cherish their whalers. A lot of people build those memories on the whalers, and that's really what it's about. Get out in the water as much as you can. Get out and enjoy those boats, and truly make the memories that last a lifetime. So appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.